It's a chilly February night in 1986 in Parasini Kadavu, a quiet village by the Valapatnam River in North Kerala. Inside one modest home, a young boy jolts awake to the sound of something. He's not sure what. In the dim light, he catches a glimpse of a stocky man slipping out through the door, disappearing into the darkness. The boy's heart pounds. He pads into his mother's room and freezes. His mother, a housewife in her 30s, lies sprawled on the floor, her head bashed in. Blood is pooling around her and her gold bangles and chain are gone. There's no sign of forced entry, no stranger's footprints, just the stillness of death in the family home. The terrified child runs out screaming for help. Neighbors gather with kerosene lamps and flashlights, horrified by the brutality in their midst. When the police arrive, they find that once again, in rural Kerala, a sleeping victim has been murdered with heavy blunt force, gold jewelry snatched from the body. But this time something is different. A witness, a child who saw a man fleeing, and the details he offers are chillingly ordinary. The killer was short, stout, wearing simple clothes, moving quickly yet without panic. This is not the first such case happening in this area. At first light, police officers from Kannur district huddle over this boy's statement. It isn't much to go on, no name, no clear face, but it's the first real clue they've had in months. The description of the intruder's shape and gait is enough to make investigators' blood run cold, because it matches whispers they've been hearing from the neighbouring Kasaragod district. For months now, villages across northern Kerala have been gripped by an invisible terror. Unconnected police files from different stations tell a grimly similar story. Families found bludgeoned in their beds, houses undisturbed, valuables missing, and a murderer who melts away before anyone wakes. Until now, these cases were seen as isolated nightmares, but the boy's eyewitness account forces a dawning realization. Kerala's first recorded serial killer is on the prowl, roaming from village to village under the cover of night. The people have already given him a name: Ripper Chandran, the messenger of death who comes with a weapon in the dark. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aryaan.
And I'm Aishwarya.
And the case that I have for you today is technically the story of India's first serial killer. Now, Aishwarya, I've always wanted to cover this particular killer because I've heard that he's the quote-unquote first serial killer.
Yeah, I've never heard that. I don't know. So if someone asked me who's India's first serial killer, I would struggle to probably name a name.
Yeah, because the question then begs, what is India, right? Because is India post-1947? Or because we've had Thug Behram,
Right.
we've had colonial serial killings.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first serial killer in the notion of what a Western serial killer is. Which is like a lone wolf without any, ideology, just on the prowl. So, if you were to think of the Ted Bundy-esque serial killer, this is India's first documented serial killer.
And this is the 1970s, you said, which is around the same time that sort of serial killer culture in the West also kind of hit its peak mark. But I don't think, obviously, that wasn't the age of social media, of exchanged movies and music. So there obviously isn't an overlap in media exchange that may inspire something in India from the West. So it's kind of interesting to see we had kind of our first one in those crazy years. But if you want to hear more stories of crazy serial killers, India's first many different kinds of criminals, it is all here at Desi Crime. And for that, you'll have to go subscribe. So you find out every time we release, every Saturday on Desi Day.
And subscribe, buy the book, and if you want to help power the production studio behind Desi Crime, go become a patron or join the YouTube membership for exclusive episodes, early access, ad-free, blah, 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 blah. If you love us, go become a member.
It's all there.
This is an old case that required a lot of digging deep to get the facts right. And also, because it's from South India, some of the names are convoluted and we've tried our best to get the pronunciations right, so forgive us if we get any of them wrong. Now, to understand how the horror reached Parasini Kadavu, we must rewind a few months. The nightmare began without fanfare on 10th September 1985 in a village called Chemnad in the Kasargod district. That morning, a neighbor knocked on the door of a middle-aged woman named Ramani, only to be met with eerie silence. The door, usually latched, swung open. Inside, everything looked normal, utensils in place, no signs of struggle. And then the neighbor saw Ramani's body on the floor where she'd been sleeping. Her pose was unnatural. A crimson halo of blood stained the floor around her head. Ramani had been bludgeoned to death as she slept. The medical officer later determined that repeated blows to her skull had killed her almost instantly. She never even woke up to scream or fight back. There were no defensive wounds, no evidence of a struggle. The killer hadn't needed to break any locks or windows either. He had likely slipped in through an unsecured door in the dead of night and attacked with such precision that Ramani made no sound. The only thing obviously wrong was what was missing. All the gold ornaments Ramani usually wore, her earrings, her necklace, had been taken off her body. Local police from the Kanangar station registered a routine case of murder during theft with an unknown accused. They searched for motives among family and neighbors, checked for wandering strangers, but nothing about Ramani's life suggested an enemy. It seemed like an isolated burglary gone wrong. By evening, her body was sent for post-mortem, her house sealed, and Chemnad tried to return to its normal village life. But the locals whispered about the gruesome murder, and mostly they reassured each other that it must have been a one-time tragedy, a drifter or a thief who chose the wrong house. There was grief and there was a flicker of fear, but it had no shape yet. Life in Chemnad resumed its rhythm, and the police file on Ramani's death began gathering dust with no leads. But just a few weeks later, however, that fragile sense of normalcy was shattered. In early October 1985, in the village of Bengara, an entire household was found massacred in circumstances hauntingly similar to Ramani's murder. This village was in the Kasargod district. The home belonged to a man named Pandey, who lived there with his wife Pushpa and a domestic helper Ananthan. One morning, neighbors grew suspicious when none of the three occupants stepped out of their house at the usual hour. When someone finally peered inside, they stumbled onto a bloodbath. Pandey, Pushpa, and Ananthan all lay dead in the very spot they had bedded down for the night. Each had been struck multiple times in the head with a heavy, blunt object, their skulls crushed as they slept. The brutality was extreme, 3 people murdered in cold blood. Yet once again, the scene was eerily calm. There was no sign of forced entry or ransacking. In fact, the only disturbance was immediately around the bodies. Astonishingly, investigators did find a clue Ramani's case hadn't yielded. In one corner of the house lay a blood-stained pickaxe, casually left behind. It was a simple farming tool, but now it was material object 1, evidence of murder. Police tagged and bagged the pickaxe, hoping it might retain fingerprints or traces of the killer. They also noted that, as in Chemnad, jewelry and cash were missing from the victims' bodies and home. The triple homicide in Bengara sent shockwaves through the region. 3 dead in one night. It was impossible for the community to treat this as routine. Quote, "It was an unprecedented crime. The sheer number of victims drew attention by itself," a former investigator recalled. Rumors flew. Was it revenge? A family dispute? But again, nothing in Pandey's household history hinted at such savagery. Police from Manjeshwaram station took charge, sealing off the house and carefully photographing the carnage. For the first time, officers quietly wondered if the Bengara murders might be connected to Ramani's murders week before. The similarities were hard to ignore: nighttime attacks, sleeping victims, head injuries, stolen gold, and no obvious suspects. Yet officially, nothing was linked. Different village, different police station, separate case files. In 1985, there was no centralized crime database in Kerala, and inter-district communication was slow. So the Bengara case was treated, at least on paper, as a horrifying but isolated incident. The pickaxe weapon gave a glimmer of hope, but forensic analysis in the mid-80s was limited. The blood on it could be identified, but fingerprints were smudged and inconclusive. With no eyewitness and no immediate suspects, the investigation stalled. 2 villages, 4 dead bodies, and the night kept its silence. No one dared use the word serial, at least not yet. If Chemnad was anxious after Ramni's murder and Bengara was terrified after the triple murder, the worst was still to come. Q 10th October 1985, exactly 1 month after the Bengara massacre, brought the bloodiest attack so far and also its first survivor. In the village of Omanchur in Manjeshwaram, about 20 kilometers from the earlier crime scenes, lived 55-year-old Narasapaya Hande, a temple employee with his wife Indra and a servant named Vishwanathan. That night, Narasapaya and Indra slept inside their small house, while Vishwanathan slept in a separate outhouse across a shadowy courtyard. Sometime deep in the night, an intruder slipped inside the main house, again without breaking a window or a lock, and he set upon Narasapaya first, bringing a heavy iron tool crashing down onto the sleeping man's skull. The blows were deliberate and lethal, concentrated on the head, a modus operandi the police would later note as chillingly efficient. Narasapaya likely never even opened his eyes. The killer then stepped out into the courtyard. He did not flee. Instead, he walked purposefully to the outhouse where Vishwanathan lay sleeping. In the darkness, the intruder delivered the same fate to the unsuspecting servant, repeated hammer-like blows to the skull. Lastly, the killer returned to the main house for Indra. Hearing the faint commotion, Indra barely had time to stir before a blunt object struck her head as well. She collapsed to the floor, unconscious and bleeding. As her world went black, she felt rough hands yanking off her gold jewelry, earrings and bangles, the last thing that she remembered before everything faded. By the time neighbors discovered the scene in the early morning, Narasapaya and Vishwanathan were dead, and Indra was barely clinging to her life.
Aryaan, firstly, so scary, so many murders back to back. But I feel like when we read of these cases in the West, we like to make fun of the West for leaving doors unlocked and windows unlocked. And we really pride ourselves in our sort of culture of safety, of locking it. I remember you and I being in college, we used to live in the model UN house.
Yeah, we were the
and
only
us
one.
being, okay, these guys do not lock their doors at night before sleeping. Aryaan, you and I will lock all our doors before sleeping. So what is this happening that an intruder is just able to enter homes and enter outhouses and jump out of windows? Was this a different time back in the 70s?
Different time, A. B, it wasn't that they didn't always lock the door. It was just the boundary walls to homes, because these are mostly open homes. They have open verandas and whatnot. So jumping over in the dead of the night is not a physically demanding task necessarily. So yeah, sometimes I guess just trusting villagers left the doors unlatched, like in the first case. But in others, he just leaped over the small fence.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Now, Indra was rushed to the hospital where doctors weren't sure she would survive the massive skull fractures. 2 dead, 1 gravely injured but alive. For investigators, Indra was a precious ray of hope. Police secured the Omanchur house, combing it for any evidence. As in previous cases, there were no broken locks or doors. The killer entered as if he belonged. The only missing items yet again were Indra's gold ornaments, torn from her as she lay bleeding. When Indra finally regained consciousness after days of intensive care, officers gathered at her bedside to record her statement, the first eyewitness account of this mysterious killer. Indra's voice trembled as she recounted the night of horror. She told the police that a stranger had just materialized in her house and demanded her jewelry in Malayalam. But one detail stood out. Quote, his tone. It wasn't like our local Malayalam, she said softly. The man spoke her language, but with an accent or cadence that was off, as if he came from elsewhere. Indra never saw his face clearly in the dark, but she remembered the menace in his voice and the way he barked commands that didn't sound like any man from her village. The small observation, a familiar language spoken in an unfamiliar way, was the first humanizing hint of the killer. It told the police that the murderer might be an outsider, possibly someone from a different region who could nevertheless blend in by speaking Malayalam. It wasn't much, but for a string of cases that so far had yielded nothing but bodies, blood, and missing gold, Indra's words were gold in their own right. For the first time, the night was speaking back through a survivor. By now, late in 1985, word of these horrific nighttime murders has spread across Kasaragod district. Officially, the police had not connected all the dots. Separate stations were handling Chemnad, Bengara, Omanchur and so on. But villagers didn't need official confirmation to sense a pattern. In tea shops and temple courtyards, people murmured about an Ollukola, loose translation being a maniacal killer, roaming the countryside. The victims had little in common socially: a widow, a family, a temple worker, except that they were attacked at home, at night, and in their sleep. That alone was enough to sow terror. Rural Kerala's evenings changed. Doors that used to be kept open were now bolted tight before sunset. People stopped taking nighttime strolls. Families huddled together in the safest room of the house to sleep. In the affected villages, an informal curfew fell with the dusk. Nobody dared to be out after 6 pm. The fear was so pervasive that even the police were not immune. Officers on patrol in Kasargod reportedly started taking their families with them in police jeeps or sending their loved ones to stay elsewhere, unwilling to leave them undefended at home. The depth of panic was perhaps best illustrated by how parents handle disobedient children at bedtime. Go to sleep, or the Ripper will come, they warned, invoking the faceless killer as a sort of bogeyman to scare kids into staying indoors. The moniker Ripper Chandran had entered the local lexicon, comparing this unknown murderer's modus operandi, attacking and mutilating victims in the dark, to the legendary Victorian-era Jack the Ripper. It wasn't an exact comparison, but it captured the essence of people's dread: a nameless predator striking randomly in the night. Meanwhile, the killer's spree was far from over. In Chittadi, another village in Kasargod, a middle-aged farmer named Mani was found dead in his hut one morning in late 1985. He too had been slain by crushing blows, you guessed it, to the head while he slept. His modest home yielded no clues, and as a single man living alone, Mani's death might have been written off as yet another unsolved robbery homicide. Except everyone noticed it fit the now infamous pattern: blunt force, head trauma, nighttime, no witness, gold stolen. The police documented the basics: time of death, probable weapon, missing items, but again, nothing pointed to a specific culprit. With manpower and resources stretched thin, investigators had little to go on beside villagers' frightened speculation. As one report later noted, quote, "The evidence is thin and the districts are already stretched. If you read it only as a single file, it looks like yet another murder in the course of robbery. Unpleasant, but not unprecedented," end quote. So the Chithari case, like those before it, began to gather dust. But unofficially, in whispered conversations, even policemen acknowledged that these were likely connected. The same uncanny modus operandi ran through them like a dark thread. One officer later admitted that by the time of the Chithari murder, quote, "we were speaking in half sentences, afraid to say what we were all thinking." No one wanted to announce a serial killer and spark mass hysteria without proof. Still, rural Kasargod was on edge. In village after village, women double-checked door latches before sleeping, men took turns staying awake on guard, and communities formed night watch groups armed with sticks and torches. Fear had outpaced official recognition. It did not respect jurisdiction and flowed through the region like an invisible fog.
Aryaan, we've heard this logic time and time again of we're not going to say serial killer because it's going to alarm the public. And I'm sick of hearing this in serial killer cases across the world, across India. Please, if you sense a serial killer pattern, utter the two words together, serial killer. Let people hear it. Because worst case, you latch your doors a little bit extra. You don't venture out into the night really late all alone.
And they're already doing that. They're already taking, the fear has, the police,
it exists nonetheless.
The police's classification is not impacted. The people aren't going, oh, the police is not calling it a serial killer, so I'm
so
not.
There isn't one,
there is genuine fear. And also keep in mind, we've often seen like when there are 2 or 3 hitchhiker cases on a particular route, the entire country in, say, the US would go, oh my God, hitchhiking is unsafe to do.
Yeah, highway of tears.
Exactly, a hyperbolic response because the news inflames it. This is 70s and 80s. It's not like there is mass social media. This is genuine fear because you've had so many murders in such a small...
Yeah.
Now we're in early January 1986. The killer strikes again in one of his most vicious attacks yet, this time near the town of Kasargod itself. In the Kudlu area on the night of 11th January 1986, the extended family of an elderly woman named Parvati Amma fell victim to the prowler. In Parvati's small house, there were 4 people that night. Parvati, aged around 60, her adult son Rajan, her adult daughter Pushpa, and a visiting relative named Gopalakrishna. It was a warm night, and as was common, Rajan and Gopalakrishna slept on the front veranda, while the 2 women slept inside the single-bedroom house. Now, you see, even in this case, sleeping on the veranda means that the killer has easy access to them. Sometime past midnight, the killer approached the house. He had no need to carry a weapon. In a grim twist, he found one lying in the yard. There was a sharp, spade-like digging tool, a kodli, propped up outside, likely left by someone after gardening. The intruder picked it up, silently stepped onto the veranda, and unleashed absolute mayhem. He brought the spade down with full force on the sleeping men, smashing their skulls before they could even cry out. The force of impact was so great that neighbors later recalled not hearing screams, but they did hear a dull thudding sound, a noise some dismissed as coconuts falling in the courtyard. Rajan and Gopalakrishna were left grievously wounded, bleeding profusely on the veranda floor. The killer then entered the house. Parvati Amma woke to see a dark figure looming. The man barked a demand for money and gold. The frightened mother pleaded that she had nothing valuable in the house. Quote, "There's nothing here, only some coconuts inside," she insisted. Her answer did not save them. The attacker set upon Parvati and her daughter Pushpa with the same spade. He beat them brutally, striking again and again. Pots and vessels were knocked over, glass lamp chimneys shattered, leaving shards across the floor. By the time he fled into the night, Pushpa lay dead in a corner of the room. She had taken multiple blows to the head, dying instantly. Parvati Amma was alive, but barely, slipping in and out of consciousness amid the debris and darkness. Outside, Rajan and Gopalakrishna also clung to life by a thread. The killer had paused only long enough to yank out the few ornaments the family had. He ripped a wristwatch off Rajan's arm and snatched the earrings and nose stud from Pushpa's body. Then he vanished, leaving 4 humans in pools of blood for the second time in 2 months. The Kudlu massacre was discovered early the next morning when a local boy came on his routine errand to deliver plantain leaves to Parvati's household. The sight of bodies on the veranda sent him screaming down the road. This time, because the house was near town, help arrived quickly, but not quickly enough. Pushpa was already dead, Rajan and Gopalakrishna were breathing but unconscious, and Parvati Amma was critically injured. Neighbors rushing in accidentally trampled over potential evidence. Footprints got smeared in mud, bloodstains got stepped on in the chaos. Still, the police were able to recover some clues. The murder weapon, the bloodied spade that was left at the scene. They also collected broken glass pieces with partial fingerprints and documented every disturbed item. The 3 survivors were raced to the hospitals and doctors fought to save them. Tragically, Gopalakrishna succumbed to his head injuries a few days later, adding yet another victim to the tally. Parvati Amma and her son survived, but with severe injuries. In one stroke, the killer had destroyed an entire family's happiness. Local newspapers finally splashed the story of what they now openly called the Kudlu Ripper, a murderer who struck fear with a hammer, as reports said. The public outrage was intense. This was no longer an abstract threat in far-off hamlets. It was at the doorstep of a major town. People demanded action. Under pressure, police superiors in Kasaragod formed a special team to consider possible links between these crimes. By now, officers quietly acknowledged that one man was likely behind all of it. The pattern of targeting vulnerable households near main roads, entering silently and killing swiftly, just was unmistakable. Yet, frustratingly, they still had no name or face. The partial fingerprints from Kudlu were too smudged to match against criminal records of the day, and the survivors hadn't gotten a good look at their assailant. All investigators had were stories and scars and a growing heap of bodies. As the investigation intensified in Kerala, the killer appeared to shift his focus slightly. There were at least 2 more murders in early 1986 that would later be attributed to Ripper Chandran's spree, and these occurred just across the state border in Karnataka. In the village of Havanchi in coastal Karnataka, a man named Balan was found murdered in his home under similar circumstances. Not long after, in Hariyaduka, a Karnataka border village, a woman named Kamala was killed at night in a house. These cases didn't immediately come under the Kerala police's radar, but they added to the tally of the killer's victims, bringing his suspected total to 14 murders between September 1985 and February 1986. In a span of a few months, he had committed, from what we know, 14 murders. Ripper Chandran was not constrained by state lines. He operated in that porous border of Kasaragod and coastal Karnataka, vanishing into one jurisdiction when things got hot in another. He had become adept at exploiting the administrative fog of the 1980s. Hop on a bus, cross into the next district or state, use a fake name, and poof, you effectively disappear. By February 1986, the Kerala police's manhunt was in full sway. The turning point, as we saw, was the Parasini Kadavu murder on 11 February 1986, where the young boy eyewitness account finally gave police a tangible lead. Almost immediately, detectives from Kannur reached out to their counterparts in Kasaragod. High-level meetings were convened. Officers pored over maps, marking the locations of each incident and drawing lines along possible escape routes. A pattern emerged on paper. All the Kerala crime scenes were near major roads, highways or railway lines, corridors that would allow a killer to slip away quickly into the night. An investigator later explained, quote, "Once that pattern exists, police stop looking only at the crime scenes and start looking at the movement, the roads, the borders where someone could vanish," end quote. The search expanded beyond Kerala's borders now. Karnataka police were alerted, lodges and bus stations in border towns were checked, and officers began compiling a list of known criminals who fit the modus operandi, especially those comfortable operating across state lines. And one name started surfacing: Muthukutti Chandran, a 35-year-old man from Karinathalam in Kasaragod who had a long history of theft and burglary. Chandran had been arrested before for petty burglary in the late 1970s, but he was no small-time pickpocket. He was known to sneak into houses at night and had spent years drifting in the neighbouring state of Karnataka under an alias, Ramesh Pujari, to avoid the Kerala police.
Aryaan, so the fact that the community has been calling him Ripper Chandran and his name is Chandran, is that a coincidence?
No, the community has been calling him the Kudlu Ripper.
Oh, the Kudlu Ripper.
Until this point.
Got it.
It is when we find out that the gentleman was named a certain Chandran,
that he becomes
Ripper Chandran.
Understood.
Importantly, Chandran had been out of jail and unaccounted for during the months of the murders. He was short and stocky, matching the boy's description of the figure he saw. And he was exactly the kind of seasoned night burglar who could be responsible for these crimes. Someone who had, quote, lived by treating latches like invitations, as one writer later put it. It was still circumstantial, but repetition creates gravity in police work. Chandran's name kept coming up, and that gravity pulled investigators toward him as the prime suspect. On 26th February 1986, the net closed. Acting on a tip, Kerala police, with help from their Karnataka counterparts, tracked Muthukutti Chandran to the town of Chikkamangaluru in Karnataka. He was lying low, possibly planning his next move or waiting for the furor to die down. Officers surrounded the lodge where he was staying and arrested him before dawn. At first, the stocky man protested indignantly and gave a false name, a likely attempt to pass as his alter ego, Ramesh Pujari. But once in custody, his real identity was quickly confirmed. In his possession, police found bags of gold jewelry and other valuables. The seizure list read like an inventory of stolen dreams: gold bangles, chains, earrings, rings, many twisted or broken, with signs of long use by their original owners. Over the ensuing days, families of the victims were invited to identify the recovered items. Heartbreakingly, many did. A son recognized his mother's thin wedding chain by a repaired link. A brother broke down upon seeing a dented gold bangle that had belonged to his sister. These personal markers were incontrovertible proof. The objects tied Chandran to the crime scenes and victims. The Ripper had finally been caught, not with some dramatic chase or shootout, but with a cachet of stolen gold and a trail of paperwork. As one report dryly noted, quote, "The manhunt ends not with spectacle, but with a chain of custody." Muthukutti Chandran's long, cold rampage through the villages of Kerala had lasted barely half a year, but it left a wake of devastation that would be felt for decades. In police interrogation rooms, Chandran cut a troubling figure. Here was a man, 35 years old, who by all accounts had brutally murdered over a dozen innocent people in their sleep. Yet he sat there, calm, sometimes defiant, sometimes blank. Investigators handled his questioning cautiously. They know a sloppy interrogation could jeopardize the case in court. Multiple statements were taken, some formally recorded in the presence of magistrates to ensure they'd hold up legally, and at times Chandran was matter of fact, even chillingly frank about his crimes. He admitted to a string of robberies and to, quote, "killing the occupants when I thought they could identify me later," as he put in one statement. The language he used was described by officers as practical, almost administrative. To Chandran, murder wasn't an emotional eruption. It was a means to an end, a step in his robbery routine to eliminate witnesses. One officer present later said Chandran spoke about the killings like someone describing how to remove a thorn from your foot, detached and methodical. He did not rave, did not boast, did not break down crying or show guilt. Not once did he claim to hear voices or blame demons or give any hint of insanity. In fact, Chandran did not offer any excuse or justification for his actions. He didn't blame a bad childhood or poverty. He didn't claim he was driven by some higher purpose. He simply did what he did, and when caught, described it with a cold distance that unsettled even veteran policemen. Importantly, Chandran did not confess neatly to every single murder in the series. He admitted to many, but in a few cases, possibly the ones in Karnataka or those lacking evidence, he remained silent or denied involvement. This meant that officially, not all 14 murders could be pinned on him in court. A couple of the cases remained unprosecuted and unsolved in the legal sense, even though the folklore and public memory would forever attribute them to Ripper Chandran. Nonetheless, there was enough proof in enough cases to ensure he would never walk a free man again. After those first rounds of interrogation, one pressing question loomed for everyone. Who was this man? What turns an ordinary human into a nocturnal predator capable of sustained brutality? Chandran's backstory, when it emerged, did not read like the origin of a criminal mastermind or a horror movie monster. There were no obvious traumas or dramatic twists, just a slow slide into darkness. Muthukutti Chandran was born on 15 December 1950 in the village of Karinthalam near Nileshwar in northern Kerala. His family was poor, scraping by like many others in rural Kasargod. When Chandran was about 10, his father Kunhambu died, leaving his mother Patta to raise him and any siblings. Chandran's schooling effectively ended around that time. By his early teens, he was already getting into trouble. Some reports say his first act of serious violence was against his own mother, an incident that exposed how easily he could sever emotional ties when rage took over. Perhaps unable to control him, or simply unable to support him, his family saw him drift away. At age 14, Chandran left his village and travelled into Karnataka, the neighbouring state, in search of opportunity, or prey. Over the next decade, he survived by stealing. He became an adept burglar, a con man, learning to speak at least 5 languages: Malayalam, Kannada, Tulu, Konkani, and Hindi, enough to pass as a local in many places. In Uttara Kannada and Dakshin Kannada districts, he fell in with small-time thieves. He even acquired a partner in crime, a man named Thimma, with whom he committed a string of robberies in the late 1970s. To evade notice, Chandran assumed the alias Ramesh Pujari, a fairly common coastal name, and under that false identity, he was reportedly arrested at least once for theft, only to return to the same line of work after release. Chandran's criminal evolution showed a chilling progression. Initially, it was petty theft, snatching unattended valuables, picking pockets. Then he moved up to house burglaries, slipping into homes at night to steal cash or gold. At first, if confronted by homeowners, he would flee. But at some point, perhaps around 1985, something changed. Faced with the risk of being identified, Chandran chose to turn violent. He began carrying a hammer or iron rod on his break-ins and started eliminating witnesses with merciless efficiency. This wasn't a case of escalating sadism for pleasure, as seen in many serial killer cases. Rather, it was an extreme pragmatism born of a criminal mindset. Chandran valued his freedom and the loot above human life. If an innocent person had to die to protect his identity, so be it. A former Kerala police officer, Jacob Punus, later commented on Chandran's psyche. Quote, serial killers like Chandran and Jayanandan were real psychopaths who used to enjoy the act of murdering a person. Chandran's case was truly horrifying as he preyed mostly on women. After murdering them, he would even assault the victims before fleeing with gold and money. End quote. Indeed, investigations revealed that in some of the attacks, Chandran had sexually assaulted his female victims after bludgeoning them, a detail that had not initially come to light in the rush of murder investigations, but later underscored just how depraved his necrophilic spree was. Chandran never spoke much about these aspects, but forensic evidence from a couple of crime scenes suggested post-mortem sexual violence. This earned him the additional label of a sexual predator, making him one of the most disgusting criminals that region had ever known. When people searched for why Chandran became what he became, there were no easy answers. Poverty? Perhaps he was undoubtedly driven by greed for gold. Mental illness? The court ordered psychiatric evaluations found him sane, though utterly remorseless. One psychiatrist noted that Chandran displayed traits of antisocial personality disorder, a total lack of empathy, and an ability to mask his predatory nature behind a normal facade. In the words of one journalist at the time, quote, Chandran's story is a disturbing reminder of how calm smiles can conceal unspeakable cruelty. He was that polite stranger on a bus who could chat in your mother tongue, and also the monster who could crush an old woman's skull for a few gold bangles. In custody, Chandran sometimes bristled when he heard the nickname Ripper in the press, not because he felt remorse, but because he apparently did not understand the reference to Jack the Ripper and took it as an insult or mockery. The man who terrified Kerala had never heard of the infamous killer he was being compared to. Ironically, he disliked the moniker. Officers noted he grew agitated whenever the word was used around him, perhaps feeling it misrepresented him or made him a figure of infamy. Yet Ripper Chandran is how history remembers him, a name dripping with fear and blood. After his arrest, Chandran faced a slew of charges across multiple cases: murder, attempted murder, robbery, house trespass, enough to ensure he would never see the outside of a prison again. The Kerala police and prosecutors strategized to nail him on the strongest case first. They chose the Omanchur case, the murder of Narasapaya Hande and Vishwanathan, and the attempted murder of Indra as the flagship trial. The reasoning was simple. It had the most robust evidence, including a surviving eyewitness, Indra, and recovered stolen gold that could be directly tied to the victims. In 1986, the trial commenced in the Sessions Court of Kasaragod. Chandran, unperturbed, pleaded not guilty and was provided legal defense. The courtroom heard harrowing testimonies. Doctors described the victims' injuries in clinical detail, confirming that the blows to the heads were delivered with deliberate, concentrated force, quote, the kind that indicates intention rather than accident. Photographic evidence of the blood-splattered crime scenes and the recovered weapons was presented. Then, Indra took the stand. With remarkable courage, this village housewife recounted the night she lost her husband. She described waking to a stranger demanding her jewelry, the pain of the blow that knocked her out, and her foggy memory of the man's voice and build. The defense lawyer tried to undermine her, suggesting her trauma and her head injury might make her memory unreliable. But Indra stood firm. Despite not having seen him before that night, until that day where she stood on the court, she knew that this was the man, and by her account, established his modus operandi clearly. Piece by piece, the prosecution built a damning picture. When the stolen ornaments from Indra and Narasapaya home were produced and identified by relatives, the defense had little room to maneuver. In 1987, the Sessions Court pronounced Muthukutti Chandran guilty on all counts in the Omanchur case, including 2 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder, among other charges. In his sentencing order, the judge spared no words. He called the crime, quote, an unprovoked, dastardly double murder. 2 innocent, unarmed, defenseless persons put to death by a brute while they were sleeping peacefully, end quote. The judge observed that the murders were committed purely for gain. This is an important detail because the intention matters in sentencing, with extreme brutality against unsuspecting victims, and thus it met the standard that we often talk about in Desi crime cases, the standard of the rarest of rare cases where the death penalty is warranted. Chandran was sentenced to death by hanging for the murders and given additional prison terms for the lesser offences. As the judge read the sentence, those in the courtroom felt a wave of relief and a chill, knowing that such a sentence is reserved for the very worst crimes. Chandran reportedly stood expressionless. Perhaps he never believed any system had the right to judge him. The case went on automatic appeal to the Kerala High Court, which in 1988 upheld the conviction and death sentence. The High Court judges wrote of Chandran's deeds, quote, the manner of attack was brutal and sadistically cruel. This is one of the rarest of rare cases where the ultimate penalty must be imposed, end quote. Chandran's final appeal to the Supreme Court of India was heard by a bench in 1989. In a terse order, the Supreme Court justices affirmed the death penalty, noting, quote, the murder of the 2 persons is one of the rarest of rare cases. We confirm the conviction and punishment. The appeal is dismissed. And with that, Chandran's fate was sealed. He had become one of the few serial killers in Indian history to be handed a death sentence that survived all 3 appeals. While the Omanchur case was one that put Chandran on death row, the prosecution also pushed forward trials for some of the other murders. In the Kudlu case specifically, Chandran was tried alongside his alleged accomplice, Thimma. This trial concluded around 1990. The evidence there was slightly less direct, and interestingly, the courts ended up acquitting the co-accused for lack of corroboration while still holding Chandran responsible. Chandran received life imprisonment for the Kudlu murders, and similar life terms came for the other cases where evidence sufficed. In total, out of the 14 murders Chandran was suspected of, he was convicted for at least half a dozen, but it ultimately only took one death sentence to decide his end. Kerala had not executed anyone in decades, and now the state had in its custody a man who many felt deserved the gallows if anyone ever did. Still, the wheels of justice turned slowly. Chandran sat on death row for 4 years as appeals and a mercy petition were processed. He became effectively Kerala's only condemned prisoner at the time. Those years on death row at Kannur Central Jail were transformative in their own way. At first, Chandran was aggressive and defiant, clashing with prison staff and other inmates. Here was a man who had lived on his own terms, now caged, and told each day that the state intended to kill him. He was not meek. He reportedly lashed out and refused to cooperate with normal prison routines. But solitary confinement has a way of wearing anyone down. Over months and years in a tiny cell, with nothing but time, Chandran grew quiet and withdrew. Jailers noted that he stopped sleeping properly, perhaps haunted in the dark by the same fear he once inflicted on others. The man who had shown no fear while holding the hammer now apparently feared his own execution. In a moment of desperation, he even attempted to take his own life in prison, fashioning a noose from cloth, according to some accounts, but guards intervened in time to save him. Surviving that suicide attempt left him a changed man. He became morose, reportedly muttering or talking to himself, yet also seeking something to occupy his mind. He took to reading whatever books he could get, starting with magazines or comics, then Malayalam literature and even religious texts. Perhaps it was just boredom. Perhaps in those long, lonely nights, even a killer sought some form of redemption or understanding. One intriguing incident during Chandran's incarceration was a visit by Dr. Sukumar Arikod, a renowned Malayalam scholar and philosopher who came to meet him in prison. Dr. Arikod was known for his deep humanism and curiosity. He spent some time conversing with Chandran in the condemned cell. No one knows exactly what was discussed. Accounts suggest Chandran mostly listened quietly, offering little explanations for his actions. Perhaps by then Chandran himself had no interest in explaining. The meeting made headlines as a cultural moment, a great intellectual face-to-face with a notorious killer, as if trying to probe the nature of evil itself. In the end, nothing concrete came out of it except an eerie anecdote. Dr. Arikod later said the encounter left him profoundly sad, seeing a human had so utterly lost his way and now awaited death. All of Chandran's legal options were exhausted by late 1990. His mercy petition to the President of India was rejected. The date was set. 6th July 1991 was marked for execution. On that pre-dawn morning at Kannur Central Jail under monsoon grey skies, Muthukutti Chandran was woken from whatever restless sleep he managed. The prison superintendent N.P. Karunakaran took charge of the proceedings since Kerala had no official hangman available. The duty fell to the senior jail official. Karunakaran later recounted those final moments in vivid detail. When they informed Chandran the execution was imminent and asked if he had a last wish, there was a no, the superintendent remembered. Chandran declined any special food for a last meal. He hadn't eaten the previous day either, perhaps due to anxiety or fasting. He did accept a cup of tea, sipping it calmly. The guards then blindfolded him and tied his hands behind his back. As they led him down the corridor towards the gallows, those nearby could hear Chandran's heartbeat pounding in his chest. He was the calmest looking person in that group, yet his own body betrayed the fear inside. One official admitted that their own hearts were racing. Despite dealing with many violent men in their careers, carrying out a hanging was a weight on their souls. At the foot of the gallows, Superintendent Karunakaran said formally, quote, "The court order is going to be implemented now." For the first time, Chandran spoke up in response. In a low, steady voice, he said, "I am ready, sir." Those were his final words. "I am ready, sir." Because at 4:30 a.m. on 6 July 1991, the trapdoor clanged open. and Ripper Chandran fell to his death by hanging. He was 40 years old. It was the first execution in Kerala in 36 years, and it remains the last execution carried out in the state to date. No family member came to claim Chandran's body. In fact, his brother explicitly refused to take the remains, telling authorities that bringing Chandran back to their native village would only provoke the public's anger. Such was the fear and loathing still attached to his name. People did not even want the corpse of Ripper Chandran among them. The prison quietly buried him in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery, as per procedure. And just like that, the life of one of India's most notorious serial killers ended with a state-sanctioned drop of a rope. Until next time, stay safe, stay crazy, and stay desi.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Kadak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.